Garrett Hollins became Nathan Mercer. Pinewood Estates became Blackridge Hollow. Deidre Kensington became Evelyn Voss. Everything else, well, that's where the nightmare really started. At exactly 6:42 in the morning, I opened my front door holding a cup of burnt coffee and found 3 sheriff deputies standing in my driveway like they were about to raid a meth lab. And behind them, parked beside the curb in a pearl white Range Rover, was Evelyn Voss smiling at me through oversized sunglasses like Christmas had come early. One deputy already had his hand resting near his holster. Another kept glancing toward my workshop like he expected bodies buried underneath it. And all I could think was, "You've got to be kidding me." "Nathan Mercer?" the older deputy asked. I nodded slowly. "We got a report you threatened a member of the Blackridge Hollow Homeowners Association and were illegally occupying community property." I actually laughed at first. Not because it was funny, but because after 22 years working structural engineering contract for the Army Corps overseas after Iraq, Kuwait, flood zones, hurricanes, bridge collapses, every kind of bureaucratic insanity imaginable. Somehow the most unhinged thing I'd ever experienced was a suburban HOA president with too much Botox and a God complex. The morning air smelled like wet grass and cedar mulch. Somewhere behind my house, my table saw was still humming softly because I'd forgotten to kill the breaker the night before. Evelyn crossed her arms and tilted her head like she was watching the final scene of a courtroom drama she'd already won in her mind. What she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that 6 months earlier I had quietly purchased the very parcel of land she'd spent years trying to control, and I had the paperwork sitting 10 feet away on my kitchen counter. See, I didn't move to Blackridge Hollow looking for a war. I moved there because I was tired. That's the honest truth. At 56, divorced, 1 daughter living in Seattle, 1 son finishing med school in Dallas, I wasn't chasing excitement anymore. I wanted quiet. I wanted space. I wanted to build furniture in peace and maybe grow tomatoes like every other middle-aged man pretending he's okay after a divorce. The property sat just outside the official neighborhood boundaries, 3.5 wooded acres with an old detached garage and a massive sycamore tree leaning over the driveway, like something out of Southern Gothic novel. First time I saw it, I remember standing there listening to the wind rattle the leaves and thinking, yeah, this place feels like breathing again. And I was careful, extremely careful, because I knew HOA horror stories. Everybody does now. Old women getting fined for bird feeders. Veterans threatened over flagpoles. Couples losing homes over unpaid late fees smaller than a cable bill. So before I signed anything, I hired a surveyor. Then hired another surveyor to verify the first surveyor because I trust paperwork about as much as raccoons trust flashlights. Both reports confirmed the same thing. My land was not inside Blackridge Hollow HOA jurisdiction. Not even close. That should have been the end of it. But about 3 weeks after I moved in, I found an envelope taped to my gate. Thick cream-colored paper. Fancy gold lettering. Real, we think we're royalty, energy. Inside was a violation notice demanding $2,400 for an unauthorized exterior structure, meaning my workshop. A workshop that had existed before half the neighborhood was even built. I thought it was a mistake. Honestly, I emailed them politely, attached my survey, included county records, even highlighted the parcel lines in yellow like I was helping a confused grandparent use GPS. 2 days later, Evelyn Voss showed up at my property in person. She stepped out wearing a pale pink blazer despite it being 90 degrees outside, carrying a leather binder against her chest like it contained nuclear launch codes. "Mr. Mercer," she said, smiling with every tooth except the human ones, "Blackridge Hollow has recently updated community boundary designations." "Funny," I said. "County says otherwise." Her smile tightened. "Community standards still apply. Not to land you don't own." She looked past me toward my workshop. "That building lowers surrounding property values." I remember staring at her for a second, because I genuinely couldn't process the level of entitlement radiating off this woman. Sawdust covered my boots. My hands smelled like motor oil and cedar stain. I'd spent the morning rebuilding cabinet doors. Meanwhile, this woman looked like she'd filed complaints against clouds for being the wrong shade of white. "Ma'am," I said carefully, "I think you should leave." Her expression changed instantly. The fake warmth vanished. "You people always think rules don't apply to you." Now, that sentence right there, that was the moment everything shifted. Because it wasn't about a workshop anymore. It wasn't even about property lines. It was about control. And Evelyn Voss absolutely could not tolerate the existence of someone she couldn't control. Over the next month, the letters multiplied. Fees, threats, legal notices, daily penalties. One morning I walked outside and found bright orange violation stickers slapped across my mailbox and garage door like some kind of criminal warning. My neighbor Miguel Alvarez watched me peel them off while sipping coffee from his porch. "Brother," he called out, "you got yourself noticed by the Queen of Suburbia?" I laughed. She always like this. Miguel nearly choked on his drink. "Man, you have no idea." Miguel turned out to be the first real friend I made in Blackridge Hollow. Retired mechanic, Vietnam-era Marine, lived 3 houses down with his wife Elena and an elderly golden retriever that barked at absolutely everything except actual danger. According to Miguel, Evelyn Voss had spent the last 4 years transforming the HOA into what he called a gated dictatorship without the gate. She fined people over basketball hoops, threatened liens because someone painted their shutters navy blue instead of approved colonial slate. One family got cited because their autistic son left chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Another because their grass measured half an inch too tall during a thunderstorm week. People stopped fighting her. Miguel told me one night, while we sat in my half-finished workshop drinking beer beside the smell of fresh pine boards. "That's how she wins. She makes it more expensive to resist than comply." I remember staring at the dust floating through the overhead light thinking, that's not governance. That's extortion with landscaping rules. Still, I try to stay calm. I hired an attorney named Claire Holloway. Sharp as broken glass, and about 10 times more dangerous when cornered. Mid-40s, former prosecutor, talked like every sentence had already been cross-examined in her head before leaving her mouth. She reviewed my documents, county plats, title history, everything. Then she leaned back in her chair and said something that made my stomach drop. "Nathan, they altered the neighborhood expansion filing 3 months after you closed on the property." "What does that mean?" "It means someone attempted to redraw HOA boundaries after the sale." "Can they do that?" Claire gave me a look that basically translated to, "Oh, absolutely not." Turns out Blackridge Hollow had quietly submitted revised parcel documents to the county board claiming my acreage had always been intended for future HOA inclusion. Problem was, Oklahoma law required certified notification to affected property owners before any annexation could happen. I never received anything. No letter, no hearing, nothing, which meant either staggering incompetence or deliberate fraud. Claire sent a formal cease and desist to the HOA demanding they withdraw all fines immediately. Evelyn responded by tripling them. No exageración. 48 hours later, I received another certified envelope claiming I now owed over $11,000 in accumulated violations and penalties. $11,000 for existing peacefully on land I legally owned. That's when the harassment started getting personal. First came the drive-bys. Black SUVs slowing near my driveway at night. People photographing my property from a street. One evening, I caught a man standing beside my fence pretending to talk on his phone while aiming a camera through the slats toward my workshop. "Can I help you?" I asked. The guy nearly jumped out of his shoes before mumbling something about community inspection documentation and hurrying back to his car. Another morning, I found my trash cans dumped across the ditch. Nails scattered behind my truck tires. Little things. Coward things. designed to make you feel watched. And the worst part is, it worked. I started sleeping lighter, started checking windows before bed, started carrying old military habits back into my life that I thought I'd buried years ago. Funny how stress wakes old ghosts. Then came the sheriff incident, the one that started this whole story. After the deputies reviewed my paperwork that morning, the mood shifted fast. The older Deputy Sergeant Doyle stood beside his cruiser flipping through my survey maps, while Evelyn paced near the curb like an angry real estate flamingo. Finally, Doyle looked up at her and said flatly, "Ma'am, this appears to be a civil dispute, not criminal trespassing." Evelyn blinked hard. "Excuse me? Mr. Mercer has ownership documentation. That land belongs to Blackridge Hollow Community Jurisdiction. County records say otherwise." Her face changed right there in the driveway. Not embarrassment, rage. "Pure rage. You're refusing to enforce the law?" she snapped. Doyle didn't even flinch. HOA bylaws are not criminal law. I swear you could practically hear something crack inside her. She pointed at me like a prosecutor in a bad TV drama. "This man is threatening property values and undermining community integrity." I finally spoke up. "Lady, I build rocking chairs and birdhouses. Relax." Miguel snorted so hard from across the street, he almost spilled his coffee. Evelyn whipped around toward him. This is exactly the kind of attitude destroying modern neighborhoods. Miguel yelled back, "Pretty sure modern neighborhoods are getting destroyed by women named Evelyn with too much free time." Elena nearly died laughing on their porch. The deputies left soon after, but before Doyle climbed into his cruiser, he handed me a card quietly and said, "Off the record, install cameras. Document everything. I've seen HOA boards go nuclear when they stop getting their way." He was right. 2 nights later, somebody spray-painted "deadbeat" across my garage door in huge red letters. I stood there at 6 in the morning scrubbing paint thinner in his cedar panels while the chemical smell burned my nose and humiliation crawled up my spine like ants. My daughter Avery called halfway through because apparently someone in the neighborhood Facebook group had posted pictures of my property. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked carefully. "Your mom said you're in legal trouble." That hurt more than I expected. Divorce already makes you feel like a failed version of yourself sometimes. Now some suburban tyrant was turning me into local gossip. "I'm fine. Kibyo. Ilid." But I wasn't fine. I was angry. Deep down angry in that dangerous, quiet way men sometimes get when they stop reacting emotionally and start calculating instead. Claire called me later that afternoon, sounding energized for the first time since taking the case. "Nathan," she said, "I think I found something. Please tell me it's a dead body." She laughed. "Better. Financial records. Turns out Blackridge Hollow's books looked like a casino laundering operation. Missing reserve funds. Phantom landscaping invoices. Consulting payments routed through a shell company called Voss Community Solutions, LLC. Evelyn's company. $18,000 here. $42,000 there. Small enough individually to avoid attention. Massive once combined. Claire subpoenaed deeper records. And that's when the pattern emerged. Over the last 3 years, 6 homes had gone into HOA foreclosure proceedings over unpaid fines. Not mortgages, fines. Every single property later sold through auction at suspiciously low prices to either relatives of board members or LLCs connected to Evelyn. One elderly widower lost his house over less than $2,000 in accumulated penalties. Evelyn's cousin bought the property 6 weeks later for almost half market value. I remember sitting in Claire's office, staring at spreadsheets while rain hammered the windows outside. "This isn't harassment," I said quietly. Claire nodded once. "No, this is organized." "Yep. How bad are we talking?" She folded her hands. "Nathan, if we can prove coordination, fraud, and profit motive across multiple transactions," she paused. "This stops being an HOA dispute." "Then what is it?" Claire looked me dead in the eye. racketeering. And right about then, everything changed. Because until that moment, I thought Evelyn Voss was just another power-hungry HOA fanatic drunk on authority. But sitting there listening to rain hit the glass while pages of foreclosure records covered the desk between us, I realized something much uglier was happening inside Blackridge Hollow. Evelyn wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was feeding on it. And the second she realized we knew the truth, she stopped pretending to play nice. The strange thing about corruption is, once you finally see the pattern, you can't unsee it anymore. Every weird interaction suddenly clicks into place. Every fake smile, every community standards speech, every foreclosure notice. It all starts looking less like neighborhood management and more like a business model built on fear. And Evelyn Voss, she was getting sloppy, real sloppy. 3 days after Claire uncovered the foreclosure scheme, Blackridge Hollow scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting at the clubhouse. Miguel somehow got hold of the agenda beforehand and slid a printed copy across my workshop table like we were planning a bank robbery instead of attending suburban politics. "Look at item 4, he said. I read it twice. Special assessment authorization for community legal defense. You've got to be kidding me." Miguel shook his head slowly. "She's trying to make the homeowners pay for the lawsuit against you." That was the moment the neighborhood finally started turning. Because people will tolerate corruption longer than you think. Right up until corruption sends them a bill. By sunset, my phone was blowing up with messages from residents I'd never even met before. Quiet people, nervous people, folks who'd spent years avoiding Evelyn just to survive peacefully. A young couple named Ryan and Tessa told me they were facing foreclosure threats over a backyard swing set installed for their disabled son. An older woman admitted she'd stopped inviting family over because she was terrified someone from the HOA would photograph her property during holidays and issue another violation. One man whispered to me in the hardware store parking lot like we were exchanging classified intel. She fined me because my truck had a company logo on the side. I looked at him. "What company?" "Plumbing." "So she fined you for having a job?" He nodded with the saddest little shrug I've ever seen. That night about 20 residents gathered quietly in my workshop. Folding chairs, cheap beer, sawdust on the floor, the smell of motor oil and cedar hanging in the air while rain tapped softly against the metal roof overhead. Nobody talked loudly at first. That's the thing fear does. It trains people to whisper even when they're finally safe. Claire stood near my workbench, explaining legal options while Miguel passed out drinks like a bartender at the world's most exhausted revolution. Then an elderly man named Walter slowly raised his hand. "I thought I was alone," he said softly. The room went silent. "My wife died 2 years ago. After that, Evelyn started piling on fees. Grass violations, mailbox violations, holiday decoration citations." He swallowed hard. "I sold my fishing boat to keep my house." Something changed in the room after that. You could feel it. Anger stopped being private. People started talking over each other, sharing stories, comparing notices, realizing the pattern wasn't random. Evelyn targeted isolated people because isolated people break easier. Widowers, young couples, immigrants, retirees, anyone unlikely to fight back publicly. Claire eventually raised both hands. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "What's happening here may actually qualify as coordinated fraud." Dead silence. If we prove the board knowingly used fines and foreclosure threats to seize undervalued properties for personal gain, this becomes criminal. Miguel muttered, "Well, damn." But the real twist came 2 days later. Claire called me at 5:17 in the morning, sounding wide awake in the terrifying lawyer way. "Nathan," she said, "sit down. That sentence is never good. Blackridge Hollow defaulted on a development loan." I blinked. "What?" Turns out years earlier, before most residents moved in, the HOA had borrowed nearly $2 million to build a clubhouse, pool, entrance monuments, walking trails, all the cosmetic nonsense Evelyn loved bragging about online. Balloon payment came due 8 months ago. They missed it. The bank had already initiated foreclosure proceedings against the HOA itself. I sat there at my kitchen counter staring into cold coffee while my brain slowly connected dots. Claire, yeah. If the HOA loses the common property, then the entire association destabilizes. And who can bid at the foreclosure auction? Silence. Then Claire laughed softly. Anybody. I don't think I slept at all after that conversation. I spent the next 48 hours running numbers, calling favors, liquidating investments I'd spent decades building. My younger brother Ethan wired me $200,000 without even asking questions beyond. You sure this matters that much? Funny thing is, it didn't matter that much by then, because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about me wanting peace and quiet. It became about people who'd spent years living scared inside their own homes. Auction day arrived gray and humid. News crews showed up because somehow the story had leaked online after one of the residents posted documents anonymously. Evelyn arrived wearing black sunglasses and a cream-colored suit, like she was attending a funeral for democracy itself. She walked straight toward me outside the courthouse steps. Nathan, she said quietly, you have no idea what you're doing. Feels like I do. You're destroying this neighborhood. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I glanced behind her toward residents gathering near the courthouse lawn, people she'd bullied for years now standing together for the first time. No, I said softly. I think I'm giving it back. Her face hardened instantly. You really believe they'll thank you? Some already have. They'll turn on you eventually. I shrugged. Maybe. Then I leaned a little closer. Difference is, I won't punish them for it. You know those moments where somebody realizes the game is over before the final move even happens? I watched that realization hit Evelyn in real time. The auction itself lasted less than 4 minutes. 2 investors backed out once Claire publicly mentioned the pending fraud investigation tied to the HOA board. Nobody else wanted the legal smoke. Final bid landed with me. Just like that. Blackridge Hollow's common property belonged to the same man they'd tried to arrest 6 months earlier. The silence afterward felt surreal. Reporters shouting questions. Camera flashes. Residents crying. Miguel hugging me so hard my back cracked. And through all of it, Evelyn just stood there frozen beside the courthouse railing, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Not powerful, not terrifying, just tired. 2 weeks later, state investigators filed formal charges against multiple HOA board members, including Evelyn Voss. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. More lawsuits followed after that. Some residents recovered money. Others recovered homes. But honestly, the best moment came much later. One evening near the end of summer. I was sitting beneath that old sycamore tree watching neighborhood kids ride bikes down the street without parents panicking about citations or complaints or somebody measuring lawn height with a ruler. And a young couple walked up my driveway carrying a pie. You're Nathan Mercer, right? The woman asked. Unfortunately, yes. They laughed. We just moved in last week. Realtor told us you're the reason this neighborhood finally feels normal again. I didn't really know what to say to that, so I just smiled and invited them onto the porch. And sitting there watching the sunset hit the workshop windows gold, hearing laughter drift across a neighborhood that finally sounded alive instead of monitored, I realized something. Real communities aren't built through fear. They're built through trust, through forgiveness, through people deciding they'd rather protect each other than control each other. Evelyn never understood that. Maybe people like her never can. But here's the part one still think about sometimes, because maybe this is where the story gets uncomfortable. If someone hurts enough people for long enough, if they use power to humiliate families, destroy lives, steal homes, then what exactly do they deserve once everything collapses? Justice? Mercy? Public humiliation? I honestly still don't know. So tell me what you think down in the comments. Because if you were in my position, after everything Evelyn Voss did, would you have destroyed her too, or would you have walked away the second you won?